Okay. Well, welcome to the Veteran Outdoorsman podcast. We've got a special guest, Travis T-Bone Turner, on this today. And I'm looking forward to this. We're going to talk about a little bit of everything, but a lot about bow setups is what I want to pick his brain about, because I see the videos that he does with Bone Collector and whatnot, and just I don't know, it's enough to make your brain explode, some of the stuff he knows on here. So
if I don't know what I'm talking about, then I fake it real well, don't I?
you do really good.
Yeah.
So how about you go ahead? I don't think there's too many people that would listen that don't know who you are, but go ahead and introduce yourself and then we'll get into it.
Yeah. Hey folks. And thank you, Richard, for having me on here. I appreciate it. And yeah, my name's Travis Turner, T-Bone. I'm on the Bone Collector TV show, as well as Realtree Road Trips, and go way back. If you're old enough to remember it, it'll be the Monster Bucks days, all the way back with Jeff Foxworthy, the Incomplete Deer Hunter, all the way back to the late 90s. So appreciate you guys tuning in, and look forward to hamming it up and chit chatting and basically stirring some archery guru talk and bow hunting and all things under the outdoor label.
Okay, that's cool. So first things first, how's your recovery going?
So good. As far as cancer wise, they don't ever like to say cancer free, but every 4 months I have to go for checkups, and thus far every checkup is that there's, according to the CT scans and the blood work and everything, no sign of cancer. So we're just going 4 months at a time, and grateful for that. But I did get my prosthetic leg just before Christmas. However,
Good.
there's a lot of recovery that goes along with that, and a lot of rehab. It's going to be a huge learning curve. But I'd say my biggest hurdle right now is probably just I need to lose some weight for sure. That's always a needy thing to do, no matter leg or no leg. But it certainly is a no pun intended, weighing heavy on my recovery time. So got to work
Sure.
on that.
Especially when your weight bears on your prosthetic leg. I'm sure
Yes.
that's a big thing. Yeah, I myself, I'm down about 35 pounds, and I got about 50 to go, but it does make every little bit makes a difference. But I'm
Yeah, it
glad to hear
does.
you're doing better. I watched your video recently about the doe you killed down there. I think it was down there in Georgia. That was a
Yeah.
pretty cool. You got that one with your bow, and then I saw a pretty nice buck that you shot on Instagram.
Yeah. It was a big wide 8-pointer, one that we would.
Really wide. How wide was he?
I know we never put a tape to it. I know he's 22-ish, I think, something like that.
That's what I was thinking. He had to be over 20.
Yeah, he was definitely over 20, but it was we didn't even measure him. But the picture probably makes him look a little wider than what he is.
Yeah, but still 20 inches, that's a wide deer. I think
Yeah.
the widest I've ever shot's got a 19 inside, and I was pretty impressed with that. That's a big deer. I guess that was another Georgia deer.
It was, yeah, right here on my place. Yeah, we had 3 bucks that we were kind of targeting. Actually, we had more than that at the start of the season. Had some really good bucks, but the neighbors had taken a few of them, and then we had a car got hit by one of them. So we were down to basically cull bucks. We had that wide 8-pointer. We had another one we called Flock of Seagulls, because his rack was just real short time, but it was way off his head. Looked like one of the lead singers off the Flock of Seagulls. And then also we had another one that we called Goblin, because he's an old 8-pointer. He's 6.5 years old. And actually I could have had him one evening just this last week, but it was past camera light. So, once again, that camera saves a lot of deer's lives, because if it can't see them, you can't shoot them. So
it does. And I've tried video and hunts, and I've just never been successful. And I don't have the discipline of, I can't get him in camera, I'm not going to shoot.
Yeah.
So I start out to do a hunting video, and it ends up being an aftermath of what I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's like a couple, this won't impress you much, but it was about uh, 2 years ago, I guess, I shot
Great
this
dog.
one, and that's on public land here in Missouri.
Ah,
And but he came in 5 minutes after legal light started, so it was nowhere near camera light. And I'm
yeah.
like, I mean, it's legal light, but there's nowhere near camera light. And I'm thinking,
Oh yeah.
there's no way he's going to stick around. Boom.
Yeah.
and I've got to learn. I've just got to get a little more disciplined about it and whatnot.
Like, I can't tell you how many times I've thought about doing that. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, and I don't make a living at it, so that's another reason I just don't have that much incentive to hold off. And plus, I'm just trigger happy.
Oh yeah, man. I like shooting them myself.
But so we talked a little bit about that. You haven't had a bad season coming back,
No,
honestly.
real blessed, and a lot of that is can attribute to I got a pretty good place here to hunt. I've got a couple of places that I own here, and man, it all starts with preparation. Me and my
For
best
sure.
buddy Brian, we work so hard all year long getting these things ready. We've adapted the saying that we're training these deer to die. So many people,
Sure.
and I get it. The guys that are having to work 40 to 60 hours a week. You don't have time to go out there and fiddle fart on the land all the time, so it's kind of hard to do the prepping like what we do. But it's a lot different than if you just go out there the week before you're going to hunt, look for some sign, jack up a tree, and hope that you're going to kill something, a lot like what we had to do 15, 20, 30 years
Oh yeah.
ago. Whereas now, it's a different way of hunting. It's a new aged hunter where you're working all year long. The things that you're deciding and doing today, between the amount of pressure that you're putting on them, the type of feed, the where you're putting the food plots and such, that's all training the deer
Oh yeah.
to get used to the property. And then basically all it is you take an assessment and of what you got in inventory, so to speak, and then you hunt them based off of really really light pressure. So it does help things, but it's not like it is easier on the hunting part of it. However, it's harder on the all in order to get to make it easy. It's a lot more
Oh
prep.
yeah. It's a lot of work going into it for sure.
Yeah,
And
but
I'm on the other side of it.
it's enjoyable. It's
Oh, it is. It is. I'm on the other side of it now. A guy I worked with, he's since retired, but I've still got permission to hunt his place. He had 80 acres, not a really big patch. And from where I was living at the time, it was about 45 minutes. Now it's about an hour and a half. Um, and basically, over the course of about 10 years, I became the manager of that property. We had some guys that just didn't belong there, and he gave me permission to kick them off. Um, and I did put in food plots and things and started limiting the pressure quite a bit. It's only 80 acres. There's only so much you can do,
correct.
but that made a tremendous difference. I went 10 years without shooting a deer on that property. And then I got to where I'm passing nice bucks. I'm seeing it. 2 years ago, my daughter missed about 145-inch 10-pointer, and we both just sit there and cried. But I mean, just it makes a big difference. But since I've moved further away from the property, I don't spend as much time out there, and I just don't have. I that year, I don't know how I didn't get divorced. I spent so much time up there working after, because I was getting off of work at 6 o'clock in the afternoon and going up there and working on food plots by the light of my truck,
Yep.
the headlights of my truck and stuff, and getting back home at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and it paid off. One thing I learned from that is don't trust trail cam pictures.
Oh yeah.
I mean, just because you're not, and by that being, just because you're seeing bucks don't mean you're going to see them when you're there. And just because you're not seeing them don't mean they're not there.
Yeah.
I killed, it wasn't a real big buck, but I killed a pretty nice 8-pointer that year, 100 yards from the food plot, and I'd never had a picture of him.
Ah,
Um, and,
he was
I
camera
learned
shy.
a lot. What was that?
He was camera shy, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was camera shy, and I think he just knew, since our gun season is during the rut, I think he just knew that the does were there, but he wasn't willing to go into the opening.
Yeah.
So he just, just skirted around the area. And I happened to catch him behind a hot doe on opening morning. And, he made the mistake of walking past me. But, I learned that. But now I do mostly public land hunting. And to be honest, it's not as much physical labor, but it's just as much work if you want to
Yeah.
be successful.
You're right. You're exactly right.
Um, because I find, when I've got a 10-minute break at work or anything like that, I'm checking out Onyx and looking at new places and okay, dropping pins here, here, and here.
Yep.
And then on weekends you go out and you check out this spot and this spot and this spot. And I hunted, I mainly hunt in Missouri. I did hunt in Arkansas this year, but I hunted 5 different counties, I think, this year here in Missouri. And having, I wouldn't have had any success at all. It's
Yeah.
just, you're one spot dry. You got to be willing. One spot dries up, go somewhere else. One spot dries up, go somewhere else. But it's the same thing when you've got your own place and you've got your different food plots. You're not going to keep sitting on a place that's not producing deer. You're going to move around.
Right.
But instead of moving, you may move a mile down the road instead of moving 50 or 100
Yeah.
or whatever the case may be. And I something that, public land hunters somewhat look down on people that own private property and whatnot. And they don't realize what kind of work it really goes into it. And you get as much enjoyment out of putting in the food plots and watching the deer all day long, giving them names and whatever. And as somebody like me does, going into a new place, figuring it out in 3 days and filling a tag.
Absolutely. No, I cut my teeth on public land hunting. So yeah, I've spent a many a time on WMA, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's we're scratching our itch for being outdoors. It's just you just adapt to where you're at. The way you hunt a deer in Florida is not the way that you do in Kansas or Oklahoma or Missouri or public land
For
or what
sure,
have
for
you.
sure.
Yeah, so and it bothers me sometimes when you hear people like, well, if I had land like that, or I would kill a deer like that. Well, a long time ago, not to, people say that based off of how someone that has land, their own land and the food plots, and they're, polishing these properties up. Well, they made the decision a long time ago. Lee Lakoski quit his job as an engineer, moved to Iowa, and worked real hard to attain all the land that he has. Don and Candy Kiski have done the same thing. And,
Sure.
I'm not gonna compare myself to them, but on a smaller scale, I kind of did the same thing. I didn't have two nickels to rub together. I about said two nipples to rub together. I didn't have two nickels to rub together, but saved some pennies and bought my first little piece of land, and then added onto that and then added onto that. And just slowly but surely, here I am 50 years old and I've got a little place to hunt, because I got tired of going to, getting in a lease, and it'd be timber company land, and they cut the timber company, or it'll be a 200 acres, and then there's 6 members on there, so it gets kind of crowded.
Oh yeah, for sure, for
And
sure.
you never know what the members are doing. And then hunting public land is, sometimes you got, thousands of acres to yourself, and then there's sometimes that everybody's tripping all over you. You wait all week and you go out there. So I was like, you know what, the only way to have some pure satisfaction, me making the rules, is going to be to buy me a piece of land. And even if it's a small piece of land, at least, like, hey, my first tract of land I bought was 27 acres. And I was like, how in the heck am I going to pay for this? My wife thought I was crazy at the time. I'm like, well, some way we'll make it work. And, I haven't looked back since,
Oh,
just from the standpoint of, what, it ain't much. But I got 27 acres and nobody can tell me what to do. And everything that I do is from an outdoor management decision. is going to stick. It's not going to be affected by someone else trespassing or someone else hunting there. At least it's my little piece of heaven. And then, that worked out so good. You buy a little piece more and you buy a little piece more. And then before you know it, it's like, hey man, I got a pretty decent little ranch here. So
For sure.
yeah,
And that's, I mean, and I think that's everyone's goal eventually, but some people, they know that they're probably not going to attain it.
yeah,
And I think, I think there's some jealousy involved in there and whatnot. But I mean, I hunted my uncle. It was my grandpa's farm, and now it's my uncle's. He's got about 300 acres, an hour and a half south of me, and I grew up hunting that. We lived out of state, but we'd always come home during deer season, things like that. But now, we've got, you mentioned a lease with 6 people on 200 acres. Well, with cousins and everything, there may be a dozen guys out there on opening
yeah,
day. And I like to be mobile and be able to move around, and you can't do that safely on a place like that. And I've had some permission with buddies and things over the years, and again, it just gets crowded. And that's got me more toward the public land side. And sure, that sounds counterintuitive. Sure, you can certainly be overrun, but I can always go somewhere else.
that's right.
And I did this year. I did a 5-day hunt in Arkansas. They've got an early muzzleloader hunt in the middle of October, and never been there before in my life. And the goal was just shoot a legal deer. I could shoot 1 buck and 1 doe there. They've got some strange rules. There, a button buck counts as a buck there. You burn your buck tag. But because of that, there's a pretty high doe population because guys are scared to shoot does.
Yeah,
Now it took me 5 days, and the last 20 minutes of the last day I was hunting, I shot a cow horn spike. But I was as excited about that deer as I have some of the biggest deer I've ever killed, because I went there not knowing what I was getting into, and I got into deer and I figured it out.
yeah,
And that's, you alluded to this earlier. That's what it's all about. As long as you're out there and having fun, you're following the laws and everything.
yeah,
Nobody should care what you're doing. You shouldn't care what anybody else is doing.
yeah,
You guys, and I know that's Michael Weidell's attitude. He's a little more blunt about it than I am, but I know that's his attitude. He's made a lot of videos here lately in the last couple of years about that. Why do you care what other people are doing if they're following the laws and they're doing what makes them happy?
yeah.
And so let's enjoy watching your bow setup videos and your arrow builds and things like that. And a while back you did one with your arrow build, and then you talked over a little bit about Michael's arrow build too. And I know you're certainly not a super heavy guy, and you shoot mechanicals. You don't shoot single bevels, things like that. But go in a little bit.
Now I would shoot single bevel, and I do believe that it is the best penetrating head.
Sure.
As far as
And you've said that before. But you love that mega meat, and
yeah,
I've seen the results of it, and I can't argue with that.
yeah.
Personally, now I went to Severs this year,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm really liking them.
Sure.
I've had some bad experiences in the past with some mechanicals, and they're certainly not all built the same.
Nope.
And that kind of strayed me away from it. But I did go to Severs this year. They fly really well. I wasn't fortunate enough to take a deer with one, but I've had good luck. But kind of go in just a little bit what you're looking at for a bow build. I know you're somewhere around 500 grains, I think, with yours, but you've got a long draw.
Mm-hmm.
I believe you're shooting 70 pounds.
Yeah, I usually shoot about 72 to 75 pounds. And I don't have a set arrow weights per se. I like to be over 500,
Okay.
but and actually even closer to 550. I I base my arrow weight off of the efficiency of the bow in order to get a speed. There's a lot of things to consider. It's not just like, I'm going to shoot a 550 grain arrow, and however fast my bow shoots it, that's how fast it shoots it. Not that I'm a speed freak by no means. However, all these years, especially being a tournament shooter, I've got accustomed to, and I like shooting around that 280 feet per second. I'm not hung on that, but
Sure.
just my eye, my pin gap, everything it just feels comfortable as far as like, throwing a baseball, or like, hey, I'm a fastball pitcher and I'm average 92 mile an hour. It's just like, I feel comfortable, and I try to let folks, if you can get in that 250 feet per second up to about 290, is going to be, and we're talking about meat and potatoes type of person, the guy that pulls above 60 pounds up to about 75, the guy that's a 27.5 inch draw to a 30-inch draw, the meat and potatoes of what most archers are. Absolutely. If you're a little shorter draw than that, if you're a little longer draw than that, there are a lot of things to consider on all bow builds. But just speaking of the meat and potatoes, I like to stay in that speed wise. And if my arrow ends up being over 15% FOC, front of center percentage, between 15 to 20, and weighing 500 to 550 grains, and then I can achieve somewhere in that 260 to 280 range, that's money to me. And most all bows today can do that, no problem. And the reason why is because if I was to go 650 grains, and I'm not against going 650 grains, if I'm shooting something that needs that, or if, definitely if I'm going to shoot a Cape Buffalo, like a lot of the Ashby study and the Ashby Foundation talks about, if you're going overseas or you're shooting a really heavy critter, by all means, a heavier arrow is going to be the way to go, because you're not going to be shooting 60 yards at it. You're going to be shooting, under 40, probably more than likely under 30. And you basically more or less want a spear. So a single bevel type spear is going to be the way to go, because those type of critters, such like a big 250 to 300 pound Russian boar, or just a big boar period, has got that long plate, harder to penetrate. The ribs that are on a Cape Buffalo or such, they're overlapping. So there is no gaps between the ribs. So, you're going to have to go through something. So absolutely, you want something that's single bevel, extremely heavy, so that you can penetrate it like a spear would. But
Sure.
we're talking North American big game. We're talking meat and potatoes guy. We're talking North American big game. If you're around that 500 grains, 500, 525, I mean, I'm not saying you can't go under 500, because if you're just primarily shooting whitetails or mule deer or something like that, absolutely you can get a little lighter and still be effective. But I would try very hard, if you're that meat and potatoes guy, to stay above 450 grains. I would not go less than that. I mean, I'm not saying you can't, because I've killed deer with 360 grain arrows, and it can help, but I mean, all the things that come with that, there's more that comes with it. You have higher FOC, a heavier arrow. The bow's going to be quieter. The bow's going to be more forgiving. The bow's going to be more accurate. The bow's going to be quieter. I mean, if you're checking off pros and cons, which that's the way I kind of assess the setup, there's more setup. It's more of an advantage to have an arrow that's going 275 feet per second, that's accurate, forgiving, and quiet, than to have one going 310, 320 feet per second that's erratic, that's extremely light, that maybe not going to penetrate as well. Because you have to go beyond 50 yards to shoot the difference in a 275 to a 280 grain arrow. You have to go beyond 320, 325 feet a second to see a difference in your pin gap. If you got to go beyond 50 yards to see how that's tightening up, so you're not really gaining that much.
Yeah, and the most guys aren't going to shoot past 50 anyway.
No, but you got to throw that into the equation, because people do like to shoot long distance for practice and
for sure
have fun with it, and I encourage that by all means. But yeah, this is a statistic, I've said it on a bunch of podcasts, but the Pope and Young record books, do you know what the average distance of all Pope and Youngs are killed? Take a wild guess.
23 yards,
17.2.
17. Well, and
Yeah.
that's probably long for my average. I think
Yeah.
my average probably about 12.
Yeah. And I hope, don't get me wrong, I practice out to 100 and I have fun with my buddies at 100, but I hope I never have to shoot a deer beyond 25 yards. That'd suit me fine from now on. But
Me too.
nonetheless, people do like to take a longer shots, and it helps their confidence, and just seeing the cast of an era, and I get all that, but in the big scheme of things, that to me, that 500, and I think I'm running like 508 right now, 510, that to about a 525. I'm not saying everybody should do as I do. If a guy, I get emails every day, emails, text messages, what have you, about setups and stuff like that. If the guy can only, is looking for a certain speed and that means more to him, then yeah, shave a little bit off your arrow. But I've built arrows all the way from 700 grains all the way down to 350 grains for myself. And I feel like over the years, this has been the most successful and the best. It's just easy to tune. It's forgiving. And it's just worked out real well.
Well, for me, I got into the super heavy phase, and like most people, I misunderstood it. When you talk to Dr. Ashby, he'll tell you that for whitetail deer, just get around 550 and you're going to be fine. Dr.
Yeah.
Ashby himself, who everybody quotes and says, oh, you need 700 grain arrows.
That's right.
But he'll tell you that, and it's written in the reports. But so I built this hellacious 250 spine arrow, micro diameter, 650 grains with like 22% FOC. Now, let me tell you, one of the most accurate setups I've ever shot in my life.
I bet.
But with my bow that shot 350 IBO with my 29-inch draw, 70 pounds, I was getting like 220 feet per second.
Yeah.
Which is more than enough for whitetails around here.
Absolutely.
But I've shot the same pin gaps, like you're saying, for 25, 30 years, and I just couldn't get used to that.
Yeah.
To the new pin gaps, okay, if I'm plus or minus 3 yards, it's money. Well, not with this setup. Not when you get past 20 yards.
Yeah.
And things like that. And I shot it with a different bow. I tried different things. I liked the setup. If I was going to shoot over a feeder, and I'm not going to get over 20 yards. We can't do that here in Missouri, but controlled setups, I would probably go back to that just because I do have a lot of confidence in that setup.
Sure.
But what I've shot for years since the carbon arrows became popular and things like that, I'll be 42 years old here in a week. I'm not quite as old as you, but I've been at it a while.
Sure.
And I'd say the last 15, 20 years, when you first got into the bows with 300 feet per second and whatnot, shooting 70 pounds, 29-inch draw, a 425 to 450 grain arrow always got me, with those 300 feet per second bows, got me around 260. And I'm real comfortable with that speed, and I know that gap. I've got a past shoulder injury, and 70 pounds just wears me out anymore.
Sure.
I went to 60 pounds, and I bought a fairly fast bow. I went to 60 pounds, and I'm shooting that same arrow at 60 pounds at the speeds I was shooting at 70 with the slower bows. And it's a lot more comfortable to shoot. I can shoot it a lot longer. It's not in the 500 grain range like you're mentioning, but I just have a tremendous amount of confidence in a 425 grain arrow at 270 feet per second. And I've killed all but one or two of my deer with a setup, something like that.
Yeah.
And just it seems for me somewhere between 260 and 280 just seems real easy to tune and forgiving. and the pin gaps are more than adequate. I know it's a little bit lighter on this. Well, it's really probably more middle of the road. 425 to 450s, kind of in the middle. I haven't had the hit them and the arrow just stops halfway through and things. I've never experienced that.
Yeah, and you know, we all want you all want the complete pass through at the end of the day, but you know, if your accuracy always wins, period. So if you got a forgiving setup, I don't care, you know, if you're throwing rocket launchers, accuracy is always going to win. So if you're accurate, then you're confident. If you're confident, then you're more accurate. So these things kind of bleed onto each other. So that when you make a good shot and you do have the confidence that you can put the arrow where it needs to be, even if it's like, okay, I'm shooting a softball, but I don't have that much confidence. But if I'm shooting a tighter group, you know, you're talking about some of the other folks, you know, that are taking Dr. Ashby's studies and kind of, I guess not misinterpreting them. Everybody focuses on the shoulder. You know what I mean? Like, oh, what if I hit that shoulder? Well, honestly, where the shoulder is not a desirable shot.
No,
Now,
it's not.
Now, granted, you know, you don't want to hit it, but it's close to where you'd like to hit because it's a little bit, but nonetheless, do I need to go through that shoulder? No, not necessarily. I don't necessarily need to go through that shoulder, but everybody forgets, like, if this is the perfect center line of where you need to hit, like right on top of the heart, up through the lungs, and then let's just say you shoot 8 inches to the right, which is in the guts. You know, you can equally mess up and shoot back there as you can go 8 inches to the front.
For sure, for
Hit
sure.
that in the shoulder. People forget about this, and that's where, like, the larger cutting expandables come into play. Because if I do mess up and shoot through the guts, because we're human and they're moving critters, I'd like to know I got a 3-blade, a 2-inch hole going through there. More
For
so
sure.
than a 1-inch single bevel, because I want to do more massive destruction back there. But if you're moving towards the front and you just missed that shoulder, to add to your point, I'm getting to your point there. Yeah, it may not penetrate as well at 425 grains, but you should have no problems going through the ribs, back in the liver or the guts. That should not be a problem at all. That will not be a problem. You'll go through most everything in the wheelhouse, and if you lodge on the offside shoulder, that broadhead in your arrow has done really all the damage it can do, other than the arrow completely going through and maybe cleaning out that wound channel. That would be the only added to it. It's not
For
like
sure.
it's only going in and you're only getting, one lung because you didn't penetrate so well. So, you know, we all should aim for that offside shoulder, because, you know, if it's a broadside or a slightly quartered too, you aim for that offside shoulder and you're going to go through the goods.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
And I think a lot of the guys, no matter if they're on the super speed side and they're shooting a 350 grain arrow, or they're on the super heavy side and they're shooting 650, 700 grains, what they don't realize is that if you're not somewhere in the middle of the road on either of the big sides, you have to have more discipline with your shots.
correct.
If you're shooting a super light setup and there's guys that are great with it, it's like shooting an elk with a 243.
Yep.
You can do it, but you gotta pick your shots. It's gotta be even a quarter and away might be a problem.
Correct.
With the heavy ones, you've got to be disciplined, as you either have to know the exact range or you got to shoot 20 and in.
Yep.
You know, and
that's a good way of putting it, Richard. Honestly, I mean, I've had this debate so many times on podcasts, but that's a good way of putting it. It's almost like arguing about the sights, you know, like single pin or fixed pins. And then, you know, there's a lot of sights out there that's the best of both worlds. And I believe that's what we're trying to achieve when you're going for that 450 to like a 575 grain arrow. It's the best of both worlds. It's all of the above.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I'm stubborn, and it took me a little while to get there, but I agree with that.
And it's
You just
and again, another thing to throw into the equation, there's more than just like, this is my arrow weight, this is what I shoot. This is my broadhead, this is what I shoot. Everything that you do, not to complicate it and make people that are listening to this, steer away from like, man, I don't want to archery hunt. Man, I hear them guys talking all the time. It ain't no fun. I think we're making it more complex than what it is. It's just each category you got to consider like, all right, more weight affects my speed. Is it going to be so slow that I'm not liking it? So then I can trim a little weight off, gain some speed, better FOC. You talk about the types of fletchings that you have. You talk about the weight that you have, the type of broadhead that you choose. All that to be, all that means is you got to base that off the type of game that you're hunting as well.
for
You know,
sure, for sure.
and when we're having this discussion, I keep coming back to this. This is the meat and potatoes. This is North American big game. This is the average guy, 27.5 to 30-inch draw that shoots anywhere from 60 to 75 pounds. That's what we're talking about. If you're shorter than that, longer than that, pull more than that, pull less than that. If you're a woman, a child, and if you're going for nothing but big 300-pound boar, if you're going to Africa for Cape Buffalo, or you're strictly moose hunting, we're not necessarily talking to you. We're talking the whitetail hunter that's 95% of the country. That's basically who we're talking to. All
For
those
sure.
other things, you may need to tweak your setup based off of what you're chasing.
For sure, for sure. And with that being said, I know my setup is through experience with different bows and whatnot. I know that my setup works. Whether I'm shooting a Muzzy broadhead, I shot a Carbon Express. They had a little fixed blade broadhead. I shot them for years. Or the Severs that I'm shooting now, or if I go to Mega Meats or a Montec, I'm a big fan of the Montec.
Oh yeah.
I'm a big fan of the Montec. If you have to shoot a fixed blade and you don't like tuning them, the Montec's probably the best way to go, because it seems to be the easiest to tune that I've ever shot.
Yeah.
But like, this is my hunting arrow for this year. This is my hunting arrow. It's an Easton 6.5 carbon arrow, 340 spine, cut just in front of the shelf, on my 29-inch draw. So it's like 29.25 inches, something like that. I end up with a finished weight like 425, like I said. Say I was going to go elk hunting next year. I'm going to bump up to a 300 spine. I'm going to put a 50 or 75 grain insert.
100.
100. I'm trying to keep my speed up above above the 250 mark, and I don't know that I can do that with my setup.
I understand. Shorten your arrow.
But yeah, and I could do that, and maybe I would go to 100, but I'd bump up to 300 spine, put a heavier insert, maybe even go up to a 125 head instead of a 100. And my personal choice, I would probably shoot a Magnus. What's the new one? The Black Hornet, the short, because they seem to be a little easier to tune. They're not real long and not as prone to wind plane. Although I love the old Stingers, they're a great head.
Yep.
You just got to be a little more careful with them, and that's just a personal preference. Not to say I couldn't still do it with my Severs.
Oh yeah, and it gets down to again, I more and more accuracy is always going to win. Whatever you got the most accuracy, and then on broadheads, don't get me wrong, I'm partial to the Mega Meat, as far as an expandable, and then G5 makes a bunch of good broadheads in all kinds of categories, the Montec, the Striker, as well as the Mega Meat, but there's a lot of great broadheads out there. As long as your broadhead is sharp, no matter what brand it is, you put it in the right place, it's going to do the job. Period.
And you said it right there. So many broadheads, when you get them out of the pack, and it's because they rattle around in the plastic. I don't believe that manufacturers are putting dull broadheads in the pack, but they're dull when they come out of the pack.
Yep.
And if you would just take the time, take the blades off, run them over a leather strop, and put everything back together, people would be surprised how much shorter their blood trails are and how much better they are just with that little step.
And that helps penetration too.
it helps penetration. It helps bone splitting if that's your thing or whatever. You've got to have a sharp broadhead.
There's
And
no
I don't
way
know
to
how
get
many
it.
guys back in the day I would see, they'd shoot a deer, pull the arrow out of the ground, wash it off, and put it back in their quiver.
Oh, I've been
And,
guilty of that. I'm guilty of that too.
and I'm sure I probably have too. But I know that's wrong, and I'm sure I did then too.
Yeah.
Take them, and okay, if you're not good at sharpening, you're not comfortable with sharpening, either find a buddy that'll do it for you, or
Get a head
get
that's
your,
got
get your
replaceable blades.
yeah, get fresh blades, um whatever the case may be. But you've got to have, no matter what it is, if it's a flint point, whatever it is, it's got to be scary sharp. And I just saw this trend over the last 10 to 15 years. I can remember you go into a bow shop and you happen to have a broadhead in your quiver and you pull it out and everybody just backed up.
Yeah.
When was the last time you saw that? Because people don't expect them to be sharp anymore.
Yeah.
And it's scary that we're doing that. Not to say that they're not sharp enough to kill a deer, but you can never be too sharp.
Yeah. It always bothers me. You talked about, they rattle around in the plastic. Something I did a post, I don't know, about 8 months ago about quivers. Quivers have foam hoods. So
Yes.
people take their broadhead and jam it up in the foam, and then it rattles around on a four-wheeler in the back of your truck or whatever, and it's sitting there rattling in that foam, and all it's doing is getting duller and duller and duller.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I highly recommend a quiver that has 2 points of contact so that it can be suspended in the hood. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
touching anything, is way, way better than, so many times you take it and just jam it up in the foam and it's safe, where it's sitting there vibrating in that hood. You're dulling
I've
your
taken the
broadhead.
foam out. I've taken the foam out and put like a rubber pad, or say cut the foam in half where it's only a 1/4 inch thick.
I
So
drill
only your
holes out.
chisel points hitting it.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever the case may be. And I know, I mean, when you see the guys with the arrows just rattling around loose in the hip quiver,
Yep.
and I mean, they're hitting each other, which is even worse.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Steel on steel. Um, I went one year with my traditional archery where I carried the arrow on my string and one in my hand and didn't even have a quiver, because I didn't like a quiver on the bow, and I couldn't find a quiver that worked with my traditional setup that I liked. So I hunted with 2 arrows, one on the bow and one in my hand. And then when I got to where I was going to set up, I set the arrow in my spare arrow in a safe place where I could get to it, and sat there and hunted with my other arrow. Um, Now I'm a little more anal about that than most people, I would say. But you're right. You've got to protect them. You've got to have a super sharp arrow or super sharp broadhead. And as long as you're getting them in the right place, you're getting the penetration you need. Now, if you're having some issues and you shot your setup and you're never getting more than 6 inches of penetration, then maybe you need to change something.
That's right. That's exactly
Um,
right.
just because you enjoy it and it's accurate and you enjoy shooting it, if you're not getting the effect you want on animals, then change something up. That may mean for the low pounded shooters, they've got to go away from the expandables that they like and go
Yeah.
to a cut on contact or some. There's nothing wrong with that. We shot them for years.
There's an,
And lots of deer killed every year with them.
there's another misconception that I was gonna, while I still had the thought, is you said you're shooting a 6.5 arrow diameter.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a fan of the uh 0.204 or the 0.246. And a lot
Okay.
of people say, well, T-Bone, I figured you would shoot the micro diameter, because there's a misconception within the industry that the micro diameter, the really, really small stuff that's 4 millimeter, is going to penetrate better than something that's 5 millimeter or 6 millimeter. Well, if you'll dig deep into the Ashby studies show that all you need is 5% smaller than the broadhead you're shooting. So most all ferrules of broadheads are built on a 21/64 frame. So the arrow shaft diameter only needs to be 5% smaller than that step down
Mm-hmm.
to obtain the most penetration. So going really, really small does not necessarily help you penetration wise. Now on a target, if we're shooting targets and doing the target penetration test, it's going to look like it. But when we're talking about shooting an animal, which is basically shooting a watermelon, which is a self-lubricating mass, all but the bones that you're going through, everything else is self-lubricating. People think like, well, I don't want to shoot that 6.5 because it's so much bigger. It's not going to penetrate as much as the micro diameter. Well, that's not true at all. As long as naturally you wouldn't want to go back to the days of shooting like a 25-14 or a 24-13 to where it's almost like a wedge. The broadhead ferrule goes in and then the shaft automatically gets bigger. Yeah, absolutely. That's going to hinder your penetration. But as long as you're stepping down from that broadhead ferrule diameter down 5%, or more, it can be a micro diameter if you want to. I personally like the bigger diameter just because for several reasons. One, the spine. It seems like we can get the larger the diameter, the stiffer it is. So it doesn't take as much carbon, just like the reasons why you're shooting 6.5 are probably because your grains per inch is down. You're probably shooting it because it's light so that you can get your weight down. And that's the reason you can do that is because it's a larger diameter. So therefore it's stiffer, but larger diameter, but it doesn't take as much material to do so.
For sure.
The wall thickness is not there. So, I mean, not that you can't shoot the micro diameter, and a lot of people may like to, but from an arrow rest standpoint, from a stiffness, from having options, a little larger diameter like a 204, which a 204 is not necessarily 204 is middle of the road, I say, but a 246 is still smaller than the ferrule of the broadhead, and then you can get plenty of penetration. It's easy to tune. That's most of your 6.5 is a 246. That's the same diameter essentially.
Well,
And like a gold tip or
yeah, just a standard arrow.
Correct.
Just a standard arrow. Yeah, and I've shot them all. I've shot gold tips. The old Beeman ICS was probably my favorite, and they don't make them, but these Easton 6.5s are basically that same shaft.
Correct.
And I just go with what you're comfortable with, and if you're comfortable shooting a standard diameter arrow, then go with that. And that's what I've done for the most part. I've shot micros. I had a few issues with insert integrity and things like that. Because of the small diameter.
Exactly. The small diameters, it's harder to get. Like if you are a lighted knock fan. I'm not per se a fan of lighted knocks because it's putting the weight in the wrong end of the shaft. However, us video and hunts, it sure does make it nice.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah. So and luckily, we're shooting those new Halo knocks that are pretty on the light side. They're only about 20 grains, but some of them lighted knocks are getting on up there 35-40 grains, and it's just it's doing everything against you, putting heavier weight in the front. So, but like you said, the micro diameter, it gets harder to put components. It gets harder to fletch because there's not a lot of surface area there.
Yes.
So, 204 is plenty adequate. Now, I'm not saying don't shoot them, but don't get sucked into the, man, I really like shooting a 246, but I need to shoot this micro diameter to penetrate better. It's really not an advantage as far as penetration wise at all.
We shot through animals long ways with the old aluminum arrows.
That's right. So,
I mean, the first deer I ever killed was with a bow, was with an Easton Game Getter 2216.
Yep.
Going a whopping 215 feet per second, maybe.
Exactly.
And just I think that's it. You got a lot of newer guys getting into archery that weren't mentored by somebody else.
Correct.
And
well, YouTube is their mentor.
Well, YouTube's their mentor, but they don't have the history either by doing it themselves or the guy that taught them how to do it. Hey, we used to shoot these Zwicky broadheads, hand sharpened with a file, shoot them with aluminum arrows. Our compound bows were as slow as our recurves at the time. You know, when you've got that, when you're an old fart like me or you've got that history. Okay, maybe this isn't exactly what I wanted, but I know it's going to work because I did it before.
Correct.
And I mean, hunting archery has come so far in the last 25 years.
Oh man,
It,
I
it
feel so blessed. Me and Waddell was talking about that, meaning like, can you think about, you're younger than me, but someone my age, in your 50s, early 50s, think about it. Like, I was born before the first compound was invented. So I've lived through the whole evolution of compound bows. And then
Yeah.
you talk about electronics. There was no cell phones. I grew up with no cell phones. So, this Gen X era that we're in is, man, you talk about evolution. This is probably
Sure.
the most innovative 50-year stretch that there's
Oh
been
yeah, for
ever.
sure. I talked to my dad about that. Now we weren't talking about hunting, but just in general, you know, my wife's 8 years younger than me. There's more difference between her and me in how we grew up than there is between me and my dad, 20, 40 years difference.
Yeah.
In my lifetime, there's just been my first car, and I'm sure yours probably did too, had a carburetor,
Oh
not
yeah.
fuel injected, not, and stuff like that. And you take somebody that's 35 years old and they don't even know what a carburetor is.
No,
7 years younger than me, they don't even know what a carburetor is.
that's right.
Yeah, there's just been this huge jump. Would you have ever thought, when you picked up your first compound, that you'd be able to shoot 350 feet per second with a compound or 500 feet per second with a crossbow? I mean,
No,
that's just insane.
I remember
Guys that
first, my background is tournament archery before actually bow hunting. So I actually shot tournaments before I killed my first deer. This was back in the late 80s. So I can remember going to tournaments shooting like 115, 120 pounds on a bow and shooting like a 360 grain arrow and
I
just,
can hear your shoulder pop just thinking
yeah,
about
yeah.
that.
And then I was shooting like 115 pounds, 120 pounds. And the arrow was really, really light. It'd be a 2312 with like a 50 grain nib in the front of it. And with an overdraw that the arrow rest sat way behind your hand.
Hmm.
And if it was going 260, 265 foot a second, we thought we was just blowing the speed meter up. And I can
The
remember the first bow that I ever shot that I got 300 feet per second. And it really literally sounded like a screen door slamming on a cat's tail. It was so loud.
Oh yeah,
It was
yeah.
a Jennings Stealth. It came out with it for like 1 or 2 years. This was like 1990. And it literally only had like a 4.5-inch brace height.
Oh,
I bought the bow. Set it up, and it would hit me every time. I mean, it would hit my wrist, just tear me up. I had to put bandages on my wrist to get through the tournament, but it was just like taking two two-befores and one. Yeah, but it was going 300 foot a second, and I'd go to the local range, and we were shooting, and they're like, "Wow, that's awesome!" And I'm pulling like 90 something pounds with it, even that just to get it to go 300 foot per second. Thank
yeah.
God ASA and they brought the speed down, to where there's 280 feet per second ruling. But that reminds me of a point that I was wanting to bring up earlier is, we talk about 350 foot per second and, the ratings or the how fast it does a quarter mile in comparison to a car or 0 to 60.
Hmm.
We need to change that ruling, like everybody has got it. And the bow manufacturers publicize the IBO rating, which is a 30-inch draw, 350 grain arrow on 70 pounds.
Hmm.
And it shoots this certain speed. That's the barometer in which we measure speed. That's not
Sure.
that's not even,
Yeah.
people don't.
Nobody's hunting with that.
No, nobody's
No.
shooting that, really, period. You can't even shoot that. You can't even shoot that in a tournament.
Yeah, and the average draw length's 28 inches. So why not do it at 28 inches?
Absolutely. We need to dummy it down, because like back in the late 80s, early 90s, everybody shot 30-inch plus. I mean, even if you was 5'6", you was still shooting, anchoring back here. That's just what you did.
For
Well,
sure. I'm
well
going to get
now,
into that here in a sec.
yeah. Well, now you can come down, like you said, 28, definitely under 29, 28, 28 and a half is your average draw length. That needs to be the standard, in which like 65 pounds,
I'm going to say 65 pounds
28-inch draw.
and about a 450, 470 grain arrow, which is probably the average that everybody's shooting, and
Absolutely.
rated at that. And now people are going to be disappointed because you're going to see a lot of 260s, 280.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Here's the thing. Once you change and set to that, that's everybody's on the same playing field. Now I'm putting myself as the owner of a store. Okay, so I'm the owner of a shop. So
Mhm.
I got a guy that comes off the street. He's been looking on the internet. He's been reading up on these bows, and it says, okay, I'm going to buy this brand new Hoyt that shoots 350 feet per second. The guy does all this work. He's got a $2,000 price tag on the bow and the complete setup. All right, we got you all ready to go. You're ready to hunt. We got you a 475 grain arrow. Let's go back there and shoot it through the meter. And this guy has done all this research thinking, I'm fixing to have a bow that shoots 350 per second.
Yeah.
Shoots it through the meter and it pops through there at 272. You talk
Yeah.
about taking the wind out of a guy's sail.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
So then he's like, I just paid $2,000 and I got let down by 80 feet per second. Don't you think it would be easier for have that speed at 250, and then the shop owner get him a good hunting setup and he's shooting 265 more than what the all the advertisement
Oh,
says?
yeah, for sure. For sure. Well,
Yeah.
that bows used to have two ratings. They had the IBO, and then the other one, I believe, was AMO,
Archery Manufacturers Organization.
which was like 9 grains per pound at 60 pounds and a 29-inch draw or something like it. It
Correct.
was a little different, and it
500,
would be considerably slower.
540 grain arrow
540 grain arrow.
at 60
Okay.
pounds, 60
Yeah.
pounds, 30-inch draw. Still 30-inch draw.
Still 30-inch draw. Okay. But I know the first bow that I ever paid attention to the ratings that I bought, it had a 280 IBO and a 220 AMO.
Yeah.
And I was certainly getting closer to the 220 mark.
Sure.
But it gave you a more realistic expectation. Most people knew that somewhere in the middle was where they were gonna get. And it kind of just fell off the face of the earth. You having that rating. I agree with you. That would be a phenomenal. And it's the same thing with crossbows. You're seeing these crossbows now, and they're rating, 450, 500 feet per second. But if you look at what arrow they're shooting,
Yeah, it's too
how
light.
much life are you getting out of the crossbow? Shooting a 300 grain arrow, 250-pound crossbow.
Yeah, I try to preach to the people, like if they see that their bow's 350 foot per second, just take that as that bow's really efficient. That bow's really efficient, but don't get hung on that. Meaning, like, you got room to work with that. You get, instead of trying to achieve 350, that gives you more flexibility in getting that, like we talked about at the start of the podcast, the 260 to 280 feet per second that you're trying to achieve. That means you can shoot even a heavier arrow and still get the same speed you would have on a bow that you had that's 5 or 10 years old. So you can harness that energy and make a more efficient total setup and arrow setup.
And with those more efficient bows, you find out through tuning and whatnot that 25 grains more just shoots better for you.
Yes.
You didn't give up that much in feet per second. You
No.
really didn't.
3 grains is usually 1 foot per second on just an average. It could be 4 on some bows, but 3 grains equates to 1 foot per second in most all situations.
Yeah. Again, you didn't give up much, and if you gained accuracy, that's the important part. We already talked about that.
Dude,
You talk about 30. Everybody's shooting 30-inch draws and things. My first bow, I had a Bear Whitetail 2. I just begged and begged. I was in high school. I wanted a hunting bow. I wanted to get into bow hunting. Dad bow hunted when I was younger. But he had some back injuries, and he actually fell out of an old Baker climbing stand. If you remember those.
Oh Lord,
The
yes.
old Bakers. He
We call
fell
them
out of one.
Sit and slide.
Yeah, yeah. You haven't lived till you sat in one of them and just dropped 10 feet with no notice whatsoever.
Yeah.
Um, but so he didn't bow hunt, so I had to get old enough where I could go out by myself and things like that. And I always shot. I had an old yellow bear recurve and stuff and shot in the backyard. But I wanted a compound that I could hunt with, and he found this bear whitetail 2.
That's the bow T-bone shot.
Okay,
When
and
we
it
did
just shot.
monster bow.
Yeah, and it just shot. It shot okay. You could go. I mean, and this tells you where everything was. Most guys shot fingers then. You're talking 96, I think. Most people shot fingers. 30-inch draw. It only went from 29 to 31. Those were the ranges. It went 29, 30, and 31 was what you could have. No half-inch increments. No. So I had it set at 60 pounds because that's what it bottomed out at. 30-inch draw. Now I'm unusual. I'm 5'9", but I've got really long arms. With fingers, I do shoot a 30-inch draw. I shoot 28 and a half to 29, depending on the bow with a compound with my release. I also set it to where the trigger's like down in here because I just like a really short trigger.
That's the way most people should do. That's the way you should do, in my opinion.
Yeah. Especially if you want to get a little more draw length out of it. But I shot that old super slow bow, 31-inch 2219 arrows, 125 grain, just lobbing them across. And then I went, the first bow that I could shoot my 20-yard pin at 10 yards comfortably was that bow that I said shot 280 IBO or something like that. The first time I think I was shooting 24-13s, and I sighted it in at 10 yards just to make sure that I wasn't going to spray all over the range. And my buddy said, okay, just shoot that pin at 20. I'm like, there's no way. I've never shot a bow that would do that. I shoot at 20, I'm an inch low. Wow.
Yeah.
That was just such a step up. And now, I mean, some of these boats, well, like what I'm shooting right now, I'm shooting about 275. I mean, out to 25 yards or maybe even a touch further, there's just not that much difference.
No.
With one pin. Getting into the go ahead.
You set it for 30. You can set your 30-yard pin and shoot it at 20. And what we're seeing, as long as you're in that 265 to 280 range, you're hitting about 2.5 inches high at 20.
Yeah, and that's not bad at all.
No.
I still use just a 20. So I'm a little closer at 10 yards, 5 yards, shooting. I mean, I've shot so many that were just right under my stand and whatnot. But that, again, that's all personal preference. I think next year I'm going to go to, I've always shot fixed pins and I like fixed pins, but I think I'm going to go to one with a floater or an adjustable like the wheel.
Yeah. I like
get the best of both worlds.
Yep. There's a lot of advantage to that. Actually, the HHA makes a good one, that Tetra, that's a 4-pin. And then also I'm really liking Option Archery. I don't know if they're expensive, but man, those sites are really well built. They're really nice. And where they got, like what you talked about, 3, 4, 5 fixed pins, as well as a floater, and or use your bottom pin as a floater. That's even if you never shoot past 50 yards, it sure is fun, especially shooting with your buddies and stuff like that. You may have an elk target or see if we can hit an apple at 80 yards. Man, those are some fun times, and it really does make you bear down. There's nothing wrong with, just because you shoot 100 yards. I don't want people to think that you try to kill deer that far, by no means. Sure. But, let's just say you shoot and you happen that the deer takes a step and you run one through its guts at 22 yards, and he runs out there and humps up in a field and it's at 80 or 90, 100 yards and he's just not moving, and you're real quiet. You range find it, and be nice to know, like, hey, I've done this before. I can put an arrow number 2 in that deer.
Well, and you're not going to wound him any worse than he already is.
Exactly. I mean, like,
at that point, two holes is better than one, no matter where they
Absolutely.
are.
Man, I
No,
get
100%. I agree with you 100% there. I I've killed two deer in the 50-yard range, and then everything else has been 20 and in. The first time I did it, these two deer come out into a field. It was a soybean field, and it was late September. Um, I ranged them 52 yards, and I told myself I'd never shoot a deer past 40 yards. I just told myself that. But I've been practicing 50, 60, 70, and they milled around, and I'd laser 51, 53. I do this all the time. And I drew back and settled the pin. The last measurement I got was 52 yards. The deer took another step away, quartering. And I put it was a Jennings Reliant, one of the first parallel limbos from Jennings back when they were still in business. And I put my 50-yard pin just under its spine at the back of the ribs. And I let go. That deer took two hops, fell over, got back up, took two more, and fell over. And I just shot a deer at over 50 yards with a bow. I just, that would, practicing at the longer ranges just gives you the confidence
yeah.
to do things. I wouldn't have done that under any other circumstance, but the deer were perfectly calm, knew had no idea I was there. They'd been milling around for 15, 20 minutes there. And it just, I mean, you've got to know your limitations, and you got to know all of that. But, and honestly, 50 yards for somebody that practices a lot is a doable shot.
Yeah.
It's out there. Let's talk a little bit. I know you've had a few videos about how you set up your bows and things like that. And I mean, I've done the whole, back in, like, when I got that first compound and we set up everything ourselves. A lot of guys don't have archery shops nearby. Like, my nearest one's about 25 miles away. And some guys it's a lot further than that. So I used to set them up the redneck way. I'll tell you this story, and then maybe think about the hokiest bow repair you've ever done. And I had strings and cables on that Jennings Reliant that were just flat slap wore out, and I didn't trust them to hunt another day. I ordered zebra strings and cables to get new ones. I'm going on this is Friday. I'm going hunting with a buddy on Saturday. I'm going hunting with a buddy on Saturday. This is Friday. And the strings come in and the bow shop's closed already. I go to the hardware store, buy a ratchet strap, eye bolts, and washers, and pressed my bow with that, changed out my strings and cables, stood in the backyard of my apartment complex and made adjustments to my sights to make sure everything. I had measured where my peep was and stuff to get it close and whatnot. Went and shot a few arrows, make sure everything was shooting, and I killed a deer with it the next day. I wouldn't recommend doing that.
No, but yeah, desperate times are desperate measures, and
Yeah,
talk about a huge pride factor of being able to do that.
and but I mean, we used to like to change strings, like set the limb between bed rails and pry on it to change strings out and stuff, back with the old teardrops. And
Yep.
But I bought a portable press. I think it's a Bowmedic. It's basically the ratchet strap deal, but it's got brackets actually made to sit on the limbs. And the bow that I hunted with this year, I actually set up out of the box, timed it and everything. I watched a lot of your videos. I think I know not everyone can afford a full out press and arrow saws and all that stuff, but I think the more you can do on your own bow, at least tying D loops and fletching arrows and some things like that, the more confident you are in your setup because you did the work, some of the work yourself. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's no different than I like to refer to it as the pride factor. Like, if you paint your own house, there's a pride factor there. It may not be as good as what you got hired out, but there's a huge pride factor. Now, I think people need to know not to overstep their boundaries, meaning like
For sure, for sure.
meaning if you're not, it can be dangerous. Working on a bow, you're harnessing a lot of energy,
Yes.
and doing these things can be dangerous, and if you don't press it just exactly right, you'll twist the limb, you'll break the limb, if the cable comes off the cam, you destroy the cam, then you're really in a world of hurt. So it is risky, but it is rewarding as well too. And a lot of these bows today, more so than 10, 15 years ago, you don't even need a press really to just set a bow up. You don't
Hmm.
even need a press. I mean, you can you can get a string splitter and actually split the string and not damage the string at all. And or, a lot of times all you gotta do is pull the bow back, 10 or 12 inches, and then you can run a rubber coated screwdriver in the cam and stop it from rotating. And then you can let off a little bit and the string is relaxed, and put the peep in there and then draw it back and then take the screwdriver out so
Yeah.
that you don't even have to actually press the bow.
And there's actually a bow manufacturer, I can't think of the name of it, but the bow comes with a pin that sets in the riser, and it's made
Yeah,
to do just what you said. It
that's right.
slides in a hole in the cam. Um, and Matthews actually has on some of their bows a hole in the cam specifically for sticking a pin in for that kind of stuff. And you
That's
don't even
right.
have to, you can also, if you set the riser on a table, you can press down with the string and do the same thing.
Yeah, just grab
Um,
it like this, just
yeah.
pull. Yeah. Yes,
Um,
it's just people don't have the confidence in it, but I don't wanna ever it meaning like, if you have to, or it's not convenient for you to go, because of your work schedule, because of distance or anything, by all means, don't be afraid to tinker it. But I can't stress enough how valuable a reputable archery shop is. It's not just like a Bass Pro Shops or a Cabela's. They have tons of product. However, a mom and pop, small independent archery pro shop will never be replaced just because of the wealth of knowledge that goes on in there. Meaning like, I strongly recommend, by all means, get a education online and learn things online and YouTube and stuff like that. But don't be afraid to go to your local pro shop and let them cater to you, because that's what they're all about is, customer service, and or they've got years of experience. If it's reputable, I really like to stress that word reputable. But just hanging out in there and volunteering to help. Hey, let me sweep the floor, and just sucking in the knowledge that you're in there. Meaning like that's how I got most of my knowledge is if I wasn't working in the late 80s, 90s, I was at the archery pro shop. I was doing something. I was helping them clean lights. Doing so many different things to help those guys, just because I loved hearing all the knowledge, hearing the stories, just soaking in everything I could. So, that don't be afraid to go to the independent retailer because they are invaluable.
for
Uh,
sure,
we
sure.
don't want them to leave.
Oh no, no, and I'm definitely. I was speaking more, guys that have a long ways to go, or maybe,
Yeah. No, I
you
know what
know,
you
it but learning to do some of that stuff
mean.
and having a portable bow press. Now, not all bows work with portable bow presses and thing, and I understand that. But learning to do a few things and having that knowledge can help you in the field when you're on a hunt out of town and something happens. Well, you don't know where the nearest bow shop is, and you need to do something, and that kind of stuff. It can help a lot.
Especially
Um,
with a peep sight, a D loop, the small general stuff. Absolutely, you should learn to do that and learn the right reasons for those things. I
and you
highly
should learn
recommend.
how to tell when your bow's out of time, not necessarily how to time it, but how to know when it's out of time.
Yeah, by the feel,
Yeah.
or
Um,
or or pulling it back and looking.
and yeah, and I like how you got the hook and you set it up there and pull them back. That's what I do too. Um, but somebody, either they're getting into archery or they're shooting a 15-year-old bow and they're looking for for something new, what kind of specs would you recommend? Not necessarily brands or anything, but specs, axle to axle, brace heights, that kind of thing, for your
Um,
average guy.
for let's say a 29-inch draw, 29 is the hump for me, meaning like if you're a 29 or longer, I try to recommend, you don't have to go by this, but at least a 32-inch axle to axle or longer. And then you can get away with you can shoot it even if you're a 28 or 27. However, you can have no problems shooting a shorter bow like a 30 or 31-inch axle to axle if you're under, say 28 and a half or shorter. You can shoot the shorter axle to axles. Now, a lot of people don't even understand the reasons why. The reasons why is, if they're listening to this, is because of the apex of the string and the way it angles on your face. Makes it, the farther the longer draw, the longer your draw, the shorter the axle to axle, the tighter the pinch is on your knocking system, as well as the angle of the string on your face. Not to mention, it's just harder to aim something that's real short axle to axle. Like if you was going to aim or sight down a drinking straw, you'd have, compared to a broomstick, you can aim down a little longer, and it's like if you were a tightrope walker and you had a broomstick compared to a 30-foot cantilever pole that they have, you can just balance and aim a longer axle to axle bow. They do seem to be more forgiving and more accurate. However, you do lose a little bit of feet per second in doing so. Brace height wise, there's a little misconception on brace height, and the reason why is because large cams jack the cam away from the axle, so the large cam makes you feel like you have a larger brace height, but the shape of the riser is what determines the forgiveness of the bow, not the brace height. So people talk on brace height, but you should look at the geometry of the riser. I wish I had one here, but if you'll take the pivot point of where the limb touches the riser and you run a straight line from one to the other, and then you measure where the throat of the grip is. So if this is the center line of the bow, and then the reflex geometry of the riser comes back like this, and that throat of the grip is like 1 3/4 inches or more, that means it's a radical reflex riser. That means it's real hard to shoot because you got so much mass weight in front of your hand. So it's real torquey, so to speak. So trying to shoot a bow that'll have a straighter style riser, and not so much reflex geometry in it, because most all your target bows are accurate and forgiving because they're either straight risers or they're deflex risers, which it funnels the bow into your hand rather than having to turn it around backwards and make it hard to teeter, and magnifies the flaws in your form. So
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. I had never really thought of it that way. You see some bows with 7-inch brace heights, but they still got a really reflexed riser.
yeah, and the reason they did that is because they're able to, in this generation, rather than having the limbs at a 45-degree angle like we used to 10, 15 years ago, now they're more parallel or subparallel. So it jacks the brace height up, and the energy is going up and down. So you don't have as much lunge in the bow because it's not 45-degree angle. The energy is going up and down rather than lunging forward, and it increases your brace height. Plus, whenever you go short at axle to attain your draw length, you have to go bigger cam because you have to wrap the string up. And the bigger the cam, the more brace height, because the outside edge of the cam is farther away from the axle.
Further away.
Yeah. Whereas if you'll notice, most all of your, I personally like a small cam, a real small cam. Everybody likes, oh, I want that big cam. I bet that thing shoots like a dream. A smaller cam is actually can be more efficient, faster, and more forgiving. But on a short axle bow, you got to give up something because you can't shoot the right draw length.
For sure. Here, I've got an example here I'll grab. I'm with you. The axle to axle length, what you said, that's about, I mean, I've shot I think the shortest I shot was like 29, and I just didn't enjoy it at all.
Yeah.
Um,
For shooting long distance, like if I was a guy that is just going to be hunting ground blinds and mainly deer hunting and tree, most all your shots are 30 inches, 30 yards or less. There's nothing wrong with shooting a 30, 31, 32 inch axle bow. I personally like a longer one because I'm a 29.25 inch draw. I come from a tournament background, so therefore I know that axle to axle equates to more forgiving, and I'm able to pull more poundage and got a little longer than the average draw. So I'm able to get the speeds I want out of a longer axle to axle bow. So,
well, my current hunting bow is 33 inches axle to axle, I believe, and I've really enjoyed shooting it. But with what you're saying, I think it's a fairly high reflex riser. Here, I'll give you
yeah, that is.
it's 7-inch brace height, but that's a pretty.
But look at your cam. Look how you got on where the string, if you're coming up from your peep sight and the string goes and touches the cam, you see how that cam is built with like an extra lobe, like, well, that lobe just, you're from the center of your axle out to the outside edge of where that string touches that lobe is probably a solid 1.75 to 2 inches. So
Yes,
that's basically giving you a false reading, or it says 7-inch brace height, but it did it by building a lot of meat on the backside of the cam.
yeah, no, I'm with you there. Now, I shoot this one really well, but that's something. The next time I look at a bow, I'll have to really think about. I'd never heard it explained that way. You taught me something.
Well, it doesn't mean that it's not forgiving. It just means like you need to understand where they're getting those numbers,
where they're getting it from. Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, people that are not educated just automatically equate brace height to forgiveness. But you got to take the whole geometry of the bow and the way it's built, radical reflex riser, large cams, those kind of things will give you that fake number that you want of 7 inches. But the true numbers are how much radical reflex riser there is and what is the distance from the axle to the outside edge of the cam.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
All right, so here's another example as forgiveness, because I'm big on accuracy, and forgiveness means everything. So let's just say, all right, I've got a Post-it note right here. See how this is a small cam, 2 inches, right? So the string's tracking on the outside and the axle's through the center here. So when I come to full draw, if the limbs are not, if they flex wrong, can you see when I twist this, the amount of twist, like when the limb tip flexes, how we talk about laser aligning and limb tip flex? Well, if that string is tracking here and the center of the axle is here, whenever it twists, that's only, let's say, it only moves 1/4 inch. All right, let's just say that we could equate that to the exact same amount of twist. And now I've got a big cam. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So it magnifies how much it's laid over. And whenever it's magnified, meaning the string tracks on a small cam, if there's limb twist and it moves 1/8 inch, on a big cam, it may lean over 1/4 to 3/16 or 3/8. And then the farther the axle away from the outside edge is more susceptible to limb tip flex, because it's, you got something to grab hold of and twist.
Okay.
So that's why, like, all your tournament bows seem to be more forgiving of all brands, because they got small cams.
They got smaller cams.
And they're longer axle to axle, and they're deflex riser. So that way there's no flaws, and there's no magnifying flaws in the design of the bow. Whereas these hunting bows that have these big, we call them cat head biscuit cams.
Yeah.
They if there's any little, it's real susceptible to not being forgiven. But nobody talks about that. They just like, oh, it's a 7-inch brace height, man. It's going to shoot. That don't mean nothing.
No, it doesn't. And I mean, there's always a guy out there to shoot a 5-inch brace height really, really well. There's always somebody that can't shoot a 7 too. Just the numbers, it gives you a starting point, but it doesn't tell the whole story.
Yeah, it just makes us, we keep throwing the word forgiving out there, but the forgiveness is, at the end of the day, no matter what bow it is, you put it in a shooting machine and it'll actually, bows that are not tuned, the arrow can be going down through there like this. But if you shoot it from a shooting machine, it'll just about hit the same hole every time. Where the problem is we put the human factor in there. So it
Mhm.
magnifies the flaws in our form. You know,
Mhm.
radical reflex riser, real short brace height, large cams, light arrow, really like less than 10% FOC. All these little things we're checking boxes and we're splitting hairs, and that equates to, wow, I can't hit the broadside of a barn. But
Yeah, for sure.
every time you do something to put in your category, you think like, well, that ain't gonna matter. It's only gonna tighten my group up a quarter inch. Well, you do eight or 10 different things to tighten your group up. Before you know it, man, you're hitting golf ball every time at 30 or 40 yards.
Oh yeah.
So
Well, the older bows, okay, nobody wants to go back to the speed wise and things like that, but they had the deflex risers, they had the small cams, and we shot them things with fingers, but shot good tight groups.
yep,
They were 44 inches axle to axle.
absolutely.
And everybody wants the smallest, most compact package. I mean, this thing's 33 inches axle to axle, and my buddies look at it like it's a longbow.
Yeah,
Um,
anything over 34 these days is just like, why, man, I can remember working in a shop in 1992 and PSC came out with the Infinity, and it was a 36 inches axle to axle. And we were all shooting like Browning Mirages, which were 42 inches axle to axle. Yeah, to get a bow under 40, it's like, why are you shooting such a short bow?
it looked like a kid's bow.
Yeah, 36-inch axle to axle bow looked like a kid's bow. It was the first machine riser out, and everybody was just flipping out about it. I'm like, I'm not shooting that short thing. And then today's era, 36 is incredibly long.
Yeah, I shot my first short bow was 36 inches axle to axle, and yeah, I brought it home, and my dad looked at it. He was used to his old bow was a PSE Nova,
Yeah, oh
and
yeah.
I'm talking a Nova from like 83, 84.
No, I know.
You know,
Yeah.
and because they used that name for so long. But he said, "Why'd you buy a kid's bow? This is this is a 30-inch draw. This is an adult bow. Can you shoot something that small?" and and yeah, and like you said, now that's just the super super long bow. I always like the longer axle to axles because to me they just feel better.
They aim
Um,
better. I like the apex of the string, the way you anchor. You can get a true straight anchor rather than such an angled anchor. You get a more straight anchor, and you can really, it's another misconception is draw length. Everybody equates your release and your D loop affects your draw length. Well, it actually doesn't affect the draw length. It affects your anchor length. There's really two
mhm.
measurements we should all go to. Is the corner of your mouth. This telemetry here is not going to change. That's all the same. That's your true draw length. And the distance from where you anchor to where the apex of the string is, that is anchor length. And
Mhm.
depending on the type of release and depending on where you choose to anchor, that is how you adjust the D loop and or the release length to equate to that. You was talking earlier about having, like you can get like if you shorten your release up real, you can really get a longer draw length. Well, actually, you can't, because what you end up doing is burying your face into the string, and then facial pressure becomes a problem. So once you
Sure.
get to this point, that's the same. And then all you got to do is with your D loop and or your release head length or the type of release you choose, you actually you get to your anchor point. So this is where you want to be, and this is where you want to be. And between the release you choose and the D loop that you put on there, that's how you span that difference to make those two marry up.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now I see, and I'm sure, I'm certainly, I don't have a tournament background or anything like that, and I've got some bad habits. I know I haven't I haven't tried to address them because I shoot well and I'm so comfortable with them. But when I anchor with my fist at the back of my jaw.
Yeah.
A lot of guys like the corner right here at the back of your jaw. What are your feelings about that?
As long as whatever it depends on the type of release again, and it depends on what you can duplicate. You know, you do the duplicate. I'm not a fan of people taking their thumb and putting it behind their neck.
But yeah, back
Yeah, I'm
here.
not a fan of that because you end up, you know, if you don't put the same amount of tension, you're not gonna do the not gonna have the same anchor. But if you're anchoring like you're talking about, it sounds like you're anchoring underneath your jaw like that.
I touch this knuckle
Yeah,
right to the corner of my jaw.
yeah. I don't have a problem with that as long as you can do the same thing every time. But one thing that does lead to is farther back here. And then spanning that difference, you end up equating a lot of facial pressure. If you got glasses on, do you shoot with your glasses?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so shooting with the glasses, you're not able to use the tip of your nose a lot of times because the bridge work of your glasses gets in the way of the string. So a lot of time, most people who shoots with glasses, they have to come to the side just a little bit. You know,
Okay.
you're basically shooting on the side so that you're in the center part of your
Yeah,
glass.
I usually touch like right here.
Yep. Yeah, and that's
Yep.
what most people with glasses have to do. So you are going to anchor back a little farther than most because of your glasses. But the biggest thing is to make sure that you're not digging into the string because so many people think, man, I got a good anchor point, and they're like wrapping their fat jaw all around that string, and they think like I've got a great anchor point. Well, remember this: when you're at full draw, there's no pressure on the string. You can
Yeah,
basically,
so you're torquing it and yeah.
yeah. So
I've actually installed peeps that way. Had somebody separate the string while I was at full draw
exactly.
and stick a peep in because there's no tension on it.
Exactly. So, but people think, you know, if you're not haven't worked around a bow, you think at full draw that thing's ready to roll, boy. It's all 75 pounds ready to roll, but the
Nope.
cables are holding about 85% of that, and the string doesn't have much. So, with the string being like a wet noodle and real susceptible to torque, so if you pressing down on it with your face, and I'm trying to shoot the bow, as soon as I let go of that string, because I've got pressure on it, this anchor of my release lets go, that string does this, and I'm going to magnify it, but it goes whoosh,
Yeah.
whoosh. And
I
no,
used to do that.
and
I
you
used to do that
cannot,
a lot.
yeah. And facial pressure is something you cannot hardly duplicate. So therefore it makes it impossible to tune. The guy that comes into the shop that shoots and always has a left or tear, and you know you got plenty of spine for him on his arrow, and he keeps tearing left or right, and you can't work it out, and you're thinking, man, this cam's out of alignment. It's probably facial pressure.
I
Because he's
broke myself of that by taking a piece of like 20-pound monofilament and tying kind of a nose button,
yeah,
but where the tag ends were sticking me in the nose.
yeah,
So it wasn't comfortable to put any pressure there.
yep,
And now it's just natural. I just make contact
yep,
and but I had to break myself of it. And by doing that, it was just enough discomfort. You're okay. You don't want to dig your bare skin into anything that's somewhat sharp. And that worked to do that. I've got a question, and it's a personal issue I've been having on this bow in particular. That D loop, the bottom part of my D loop, I can't get to settle. It keeps spinning on me. What am I doing wrong? I've tightened it with a tool. But about every third shot, the bottom part spins forward on me.
Could be. I wonder if the serving was served one way, and in the way you meaning like if the serving was redone, served back the other way, it would want to tighten up rather than loosen up. You know how
Mm,
you know how you can twist the knock around.
yeah.
And
No, that makes sense. That makes sense.
that's why, you know, because it wants to unwind, but your top one doesn't, because your top one's wanting to go the same direction based off the serving, but it's digging into your knock set probably that you have there. Or
Okay.
do you have knock sets? inside?
Yes, I've got one knock set.
Is it, and it's on the top side?
It's on the top side.
Well, then that's probably the servant is probably wanting, the whole D loop is wanting to spin down the string, but but the top one bottoms out into your knock set, whereas the bottom one doesn't have anything. I personally I use two knock sets. I use a soft knock on top and bottom. Not that you don't have to. It's just I like it from a standpoint of, like we talked about in the field, if your D loop comes off, you got a place to hang your hat to tie another D loop without disrupting the whole tune of the bow.
I'll have to mess with that. Now I've got a hard knock there, but I could tie a soft knock
in there
down there below and see if that makes a difference.
Yeah, another thing is when you tie that knock, the D loop is you said you use the tool to tighten it up, but what I like to do whenever I'm tying the D loop is I put, not on the ends, but I put wax on the D loop.
Okay.
So that when I am cinching it down, there's not hard friction of the material. There's wax, which allows it to seat even more. It lubricates where all that, that knot is actually constricting like a boa. It allows it to seat deeper because it has a little bit of wax and lubrication. Plus, it'll help you longevity wise. If you get caught in the rain, it displaces the water, and plus it's not dry right there, because you don't want to wax a D loop in those knots after you've got it tied on. But doing waxing the D loop before you install it makes it cinch a little tighter.
Sure. Okay. That definitely. I've tied plenty of D loops before, and I just never had that issue. But what you're telling me, that makes a lot of sense. And the serving materials now are a lot slicker than they used to be.
That's right.
And that makes a lot of sense. Kind of sticking with the bow setups and stuff, and we'll get ready to close out. For years, I'd grab a bow, just kind of get it squared up and shoot it, and that's how I shot it. I didn't paper tune it, any of that. And I've in the last 5-6 years, gotten paper tuning, bear shaft tuning, and all that. And every little step that you do makes a difference, obviously, in your accuracy, your consistency.
Building confidence more than anything.
Building confidence. I think I've seen some videos where you've done paper tuning. Do you mess with bear shaft tuning at all?
Sometimes I do. I like to group tune, way back at 40 yards and see, to see where the bear shafts are hitting in relation to that. I have done some bear shaft tuning, and I know how to do it. However, I think a lot of times people, rather than investing, so many people invest so much time into tuning of the bow, which, once you've got a bullet hole, a paper tune bullet hole, and then you back up, and then you double check your groups, and then you can finagle the rest just a little bit, and or adjust the timing to help with your holding, those things to kind of polish up your tune, so to speak. And those things may need to be done over a couple of days. I would rather see people invest more time into making themselves. I think they do more for their shooting if they would invest into themselves as far as executing a good shot and being more machine-like. That would suit them or serve them way better than investing all this tuning time, thinking it's always the bow, it's always the bow, it's always the bow. Whereas if you work on yourself and just, try to be more like a machine, you'll get, it'll serve you way better as far as your accuracy and your pridefulness and your confidence wise, more so than the tuning part.
And I've been to 3D tournaments. I've never really shot competitively or anything, but just local tournaments and whatnot. And you see the guy that starts to fall apart about halfway through, and he's tweaking on his sights and he's adjusting his wrist.
Yeah.
He's tired.
Yeah.
He needs to take a break, get a cold drink, shoot a couple arrows into a close target, and go back to what he was doing.
Yeah.
But my bow came out of tune. And not to say that doesn't happen during a tournament.
Oh, yeah.
You being a tournament archer, I'm sure you've seen that happen a lot. but the most common denominator is you're fatigued, you're doing something wrong. Check that out first before you start wrenching on your boat.
Yeah. Yeah. We need to look in the mirror a little bit more,
I know
again.
you talked about with Nick was having some issues, and you grabbed his bow and here, let me take a look at that, and then just handed it back to him. And sometimes we just need that little
Oh
mental
yeah.
reset.
The little placebo, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah,
Here's a pill that's going to fix everything. And it's just a sugar tablet.
exactly. No, and it I'm trying to think. And I know you've covered in your videos that as long as you're shooting a quality arrow, now you you like the Cirrus products.
Yeah. But
Um,
there's a lot of
but
good
as,
air.
as long as you're shooting a quality arrow, it doesn't really matter.
Correct.
Um, I went back to a Whisker Biscuit rest this year just because it's kind of old reliable.
I ain't got no problem with
Um,
that.
uh, but I do like the dropaways. My thought was, and again, it's all personal preference. Hunting public land, going several miles into the woods, hanging from a saddle, and that sort of thing. The least moving parts that I can introduce to my bow, the better. Was my personal thing.
Sure.
But you know, what would you what style of rest, if you had to tell somebody what to pick, what style of rest would you recommend?
Well, when you're building a setup, naturally you've chosen the bow. Let's just start from the basis. You've chosen the bow. You hopefully you've made a good choice on your bow. A lot of good brands of bows out there, a lot of good models. So it's not like, you have to, there's only two to choose from. There's a lot of good bows out there. You've shot a few of them, you like them. So now we're going to build the bow up. I tell everybody, and I probably sound like a broken record, but don't skimp on a good rest. And a good rest doesn't necessarily mean $300. A good rest is just a good rest. But you can't buy, if you put a crappy rest on there and get crappy performance out of your rest, a $400 sight is not going to make up for a crappy rest.
No, not at all.
With that said, it is the basis. A good release, and a good release doesn't mean it could be any different style. It just means something that's tight tolerances, really well made, something that is really duplicatable and dependable. So a good release and a good rest is the foundation of it. And then from that point on, the stabilizers, the quiver, the sight even are all just personal preference. That's where you can trim some fat on your budget if you're setting a bow up. You mentioned a Whisker Biscuit. Dropaways are the thing right now for
Mm-hmm.
hunting. We're talking bow hunting. They offer full containment, and then they offer to where you can shoot no matter what your fletching configuration, three fletch, four fletch. I don't see the point in four fletch myself. Three fletches, the pros don't outweigh the cons on a four fletch by no means. So with that said, a three fletch arrow, you get better clearance. It's consistent because it's dropping away, and it's easy to tune, and it offers full containment. However, the Whisker Biscuit, I have no problems with it for a economical, dependable. There's nothing wrong with a Whisker Biscuit at all. It has full containment. It's quiet. The disadvantages to a Whisker Biscuit is if you hunt up north or in freezing temperatures, if there's any little bit of moisture in there, it can freeze, which then changes things a little different. But that's a small percentage of time of hunting. And then the other thing it does, depending on what type of vein you shoot and or the degree of offset you have, it will wear your veins. It does wear down on your veins. And then you do need to replace it. You don't need to let it get really, really, really shabby. But if you shoot relatively a good amount, you need to replace it. But as far as accuracy wise and being a dependable, can count on and not breaking the bank, it's a good rest for sure.
Now, you were talking about your arrow setups on one of the videos I watched. I don't remember the brand of vein that you said, but you said they were stiff like a guitar pick.
Yes, those are
Um,
tack vein.
tack veins. Okay. Well, I've been shooting. They're not quite that stiff, but they're fairly stiff. I've been shooting these bully veins.
Yes.
Um, and they're a fairly stiff vein. And I
Yeah.
tell you, I like them. I don't know, with this arrow and that bow, I paper tuned it. I didn't bare shaft tune it. I just paper tuned it. And it's the first time in a long time that shooting at 20 yards, I can't shoot at the same bullseye. I've got to shoot at different ones every time because I'm afraid I'm going to split my nocks.
That's good.
And
I love those knocks, by the way. That's a micro.
mhm.
I think it's called the micro super knock. I like the fact that it's so short that the throat is right real close to the actual
I
where the
like that
pommel
too. I
starts.
like that too. I like that too.
But the farther away that throat is, the more apt it's to twist off or give you problems.
Sure. And but what I also noticed with these veins being stiffer like that, they seem quieter in flight too.
Yeah, oh yeah, they are.
Um, and
I personally, and not, those, I'm not that big of a deal on veins. My personal preference is I like a lower profile where the top of the vein is closer to the arrow and have
mhm,
a longer vein. So a
mhm,
3-inch vein that has more surface area and
sure.
it's more susceptible to the degree of offset rather than having a 2-inch on a 1 degree. I'd rather have a 3-inch on a 1 degree. So it actually grabs more air and has more rotation, but yet doesn't, the taller it is, the more susceptible it is to flap if it's not a
Mhm,
stiff vein.
sure.
And actually, the tack veins are good because of the stiffness. However, I was having some problems with them, with adhesion and or longevity, meaning like after about a year, they would get kind of flimsy. And
Okay.
I've always had such great luck with flex veins.
Oh,
They're
okay.
they're 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 expensive, but man, I've taken some of them and wrapped rubber bands around the veins and tighten them up like this. Left them something you would never do with your vein. And I'd set it up there in in 70-degree room for weeks. Left it like that. Pull them off and let them sit for 48 hours, and they flop right back to straight.
Wow.
Such an amazing memory. See, and they're at the base of them are real thick, and then it's thin as it goes to the top, but it's real stiff. Not quite as stiff as the like your bully vein, or not quite as stiff as the tack vein, but it's really pretty rigid and extremely quiet in flight.
That's a big one. With the heavy arrow setups and ranch fairy and all that, a lot of people, there was a push to go to feathers. And I actually, that real heavy setup I was talking about, I put feathers on. And there are some advantages to feathers as far as forgiveness if your clearance isn't quite right and that type of thing. But they're
But in
noisy.
but
They're
it
noisy.
but in this day and age, and I'm a fan of feathers for traditional shooting off the shelf. I'm a fan of it. But in this day and age, shooting a shoot through style riser, the design and the geometry of the bows, there's no need to have to worry about shooting a feather for clearance issues. If you're having to change your vane setup to feathers for a clearance issue, you got more problems than the feather.
I agree with you. I
And
agree with you that
yeah,
um
the feathers do steer. If you're having steering problems and tuning problems, they do shoot better. I mean, they do steer better, but then you got to worry about the weather. They get beat down dragging them through the weeds. And then plus like you just said, they're extremely noisy in flight, extremely noisy.
yeah,
They
for
do
sure.
fly good. Do you follow a lot of the stuff with Ranch Fairy?
Um Not as much as I did, but I do follow it.
Yeah, when he first come out, I liked what he was preaching because I mean I liked the fact that he was bringing light to the Ashby Foundation. However, after some time, I don't like the way he delivers his message. As far as the way he's delivering it, it's almost like talking down to all other archers and hunters and stuff.
Yeah,
No,
and I've actually had him on here, and I'm with you there. It's one of those deals when it comes to anything in life.
yeah,
I guess you got to eat the meat and spit out the bones.
yeah,
But I understand what you're saying. And I think unfortunately, a lot of the guys that follow that philosophy went even further down the road. And I
Yeah.
mean, you can't get on a bow hunting forum where somebody doesn't say that the reason you lost a deer is because you weren't shooting a 600 grain arrow.
No.
And not to say that the 650 grain arrows and a single bevel broadhead and stuff that may save your tail in certain scenarios, but like you said already, that mega meat may too. When you get a gut shot and you get a bigger hole,
Correct.
there's gives and takes with both sides.
Sure.
Pick what you're comfortable with. I mean, I fell into it hard, and I shot it for a couple of years. I just cannot get used to the trajectory.
Yeah, I just think that his delivery causes division within us.
And I can certainly see that. I can
I don't
certainly see that.
That's what I don't like. Meaning, like, I hope that when people watch a podcast that I've been on, or like a conversation that you and I have had, that people are like, you know, the information that T-Bone talked about, um, meaning he delivered it from a pro and con standpoint. Basically, take the information and use it to how you see fit, get that, which gives the viewer and or the person I'm talking to the benefit of having some common sense.
Sure.
And just using the information, meaning not like, it doesn't have to be like, you got to shoot my arrow, you're a dumbass if you don't shoot this. I don't like that delivery point, not at all.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm with you there. And it's like, you're talking about your arrow setup and how 500 to 550 grains is the point where you like to be and things like that. Well, I tell you, I'm shooting 425. You're not beating me over the head
No,
and telling, um,
I've
but
killed a lot of
hey,
critters at 425.
yeah, and that's probably on average that's a pretty typical weight. I agree with you 100%. The 500 grains or heavier is good.
No, I
What
like
it
to say
boils
it.
down to with me is mine shoots well. I'm confident in it, and that's just what I'm going to stick with.
Dude, I mean, high five. If we were there in the same room, I'd be high fiving you and telling you to go at it. At the end of the day, this reverts back to a lot what else says. Don't let nobody tell you what you can and can't. This is just an open conversation, and me having worked on bows and stuff, this is what I like, and this is what the parameters in which I choose. It's not
Sure.
like saying you got to shoot this and you got to. I'm not saying that. I mean,
No.
there's great broadheads out there. There's lots of different broadheads. I just like to say, I've come to this conclusion and this is what makes me feel comfortable. Whereas there may be 15 other different people that have something different. And at the end
Oh
of
yeah.
the day, we all want happy gut piles and good times
For
outside.
sure. For sure. Well, it's like, Wydell, he went to a lighter setup a couple of years ago and wasn't really happy with it.
Right.
And went back. But that video where
I
he
fought,
shot
I,
the
I fought him on that too. I mean, I was like, man, we need heavier. We need heavier like this. I mean, I think it'll be all right. The thing about Waddell, this is the thing about Waddell is like, I've set his bows up for years. Waddell is incredibly confident, not arrogant. Don't confuse it with confidence as far as like I could give him a bow, say, man, you're ready. And his sights would be bent and he would sight it in and he'd hit okay. And he would go out there with the utmost confidence. Whereas most people would be like a little on the cringy side, like, oh my gosh. And this is a not me kissing his tail. This is just saying he's one of the few that has the utmost confidence. I mean, like he'll shoot veins that only have two on there, one of them ripped up, kill an animal like that. Whereas like I'm sitting there like there's no way I want my stuff tight, I want my stuff,
Yeah,
you
I'm
know,
with you.
but he's the type, like he's gonna get the job done and he's not gonna let that little negativity and or affect his confidence. So he goes out there confident wise and makes it work. So that's why he went with that. He's like, man, you can kill an elk with this. And I'm like, you can, Waddell, just like you said earlier, you can kill an elk with a 243. However, a 300 Win Mag might be a better choice for that, but he's like, man, I think we can do it. I think this arrow's gonna work good. So, but he's seen.
Yeah. Well, he had that video where he shot the deer and the arrow just bounced off the side. And there were
Yeah.
so many comments on there. Well, if you were shooting this and if you maybe, but it's a little too late now.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of things could have
That's a
gone
perfect.
different.
We believe me, we have dissected that shot a lot. It was pretty steep quartered away, and he was shooting a really light arrow setup. If I ain't mistaken, it might even have been. It was right around 400, but it may even been a little less than 400. I mean, it was a light setup, and it was that havoc. It was the havoc expandable. It wasn't the dead meat. It wasn't the mega meat, and those things. Like if it's not, if since it's a two blade, it could have been. All it's got to do is hit a rib, and if the arrow veers off because of the lightweightedness, it's taking a different path. So it's almost like shanking a nail with a hammer. So if you don't hit that hammer exactly right, once it started the energy going down the side of the animal, there's no way it's going to turn and go back in. You got to start it in and continually keeping it on its path. And, all things considered, steep quartered away, the deer may have been moving. It may have hit a rib just exactly right. A really light arrow, that choice of broadhead, all those things checked off to the boxes of like, Waddell, you just shot down the side of this big buck. And that's what happened.
Yeah, and unfortunately it happens.
Yeah.
And tearing somebody apart isn't gonna change the fact that it happened. And I don't know, there was a lot of really bad comments.
But I can promise you, it didn't bother him.
Sure.
It didn't
But
bother
there wasn't, whether you agree with it or not, it wasn't the right place. We've got so many enemies in the hunting world. We don't need to make enemies amongst ourselves.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. But and it can be discussed, but let's put it together. Let's look at it for what it is. It's like Waddell tried this, a really light arrow. This is what happened. Thank God it got documented so that the whole country can watch it and learn from it. And then now let's move on.
Well, and he was willing to post that video. How many people was okay, that one's going in the archives.
Yeah, we didn't even have to show that. Yeah, we
Yeah.
didn't have to show that on the show if we didn't. I mean, just like I don't know if you remember the Waddy Bone buck when we were in Mexico. This was years ago. I shot a buck and I made a really good shot. I mean, like you watch the shot and it's like 2 inches behind the point of the shoulder. I'm in a ground blind. It's like, oh yeah, he's in the heart. That's perfect. The deer runs 1,500 yards. Luckily, it went by where Waddell was hunting, and it was still alive, and Waddell finished it off for me.
Oh,
But
wow.
so everybody eat me alive by saying that broadhead didn't open. Well, when we got there, you could tell the deer was going to die. It just like bumfuzzled me that it made it that far. And it must have hit the perfect pocket, just missed the heart, wedged in between the lungs or whatever. But it went through all that. It just didn't hit anything that was. I mean, it was almost in the. If there's a no man's zone right around the heart, it's exactly what it did. I mean,
And we've all had something like that happen at some point. I mean, it's just it's unfortunate.
But with
But
us,
you got to learn from it.
it's documented. Whereas
Yeah.
so many other people are in camp and they shoot the buck and they think, I got it, I hit it good. But you can't go back and review the footage. So you don't know exactly where you hit it. You think you hit it in the heart. And then how many times have you tracked a deer with a buddy and the guy said, oh yeah, I hit it good. And you get up on it and it's 8 inches left of where he said he hit it.
Hey, I shot one with a recurve about 5 years ago. A doe came in, she's about 25 yards. And I shot, and I shoot with my recurve, I shoot pink fletching because I can see them.
Sure.
And I swear I watched those fletches bury right on the crease behind her shoulder, about halfway up.
And sometimes you see what you want to see.
Yeah. Well, I get up and I find the arrow and it's covered in guts. No blood, just guts.
Yeah.
And I found the deer about 24 hours later, and I had punched it just behind the rib cage. And I wish I had that on video, to see what happened. But
Yeah.
in my mind's eye now, I still see those fletchings sinking right behind that deer's shoulder. That's
Yeah.
what I saw, but that's not what happened.
I know. Well, this is what happens is the people, when you're shooting, you're like, make a perfect shot. There's a lot going on there in that nanosecond. So you see what you think you wanted to see. Plus, we've had the luxury of killing so many animals on camera, and we get to dissect that frame by frame. And you've seen it on the internet, how those deer contort and change shape in a nanosecond. Like they'll drop a solid 8-10 inches and twist. So if you're shooting a slower recurve, you're thinking like that deer's like a target. Man, I've shot this in the backyard so many times, and I know I made a good release. I seen the arrow going right where it was. But when you're shooting a moving animal, it don't take much for him to drop 8 inches and spin on an arrow that's only going 205 feet per second out of your recurve. So
I
therefore,
know.
you don't have it on tape. So it's just like, man, it was going good, and then I can't believe I hit it back here. So
Well, yeah, and I think it happens so fast that you're still seeing the deer where it is, but it's not there anymore.
you're exactly right. And then
Yeah.
we get critiqued so much because we ours is documented. But that's the great thing, and I'm proud of us as at Bone Collector, as Waddell, myself, Nick. We show it all,
Yeah.
good, bad, or otherwise. By God,
Well, and I like that. I like the
yeah,
fact if you're willing to show a gut shot or something like, I mean, because so many people years ago watching videos, I mean, I can remember saving my money to go get a VHS tape, a hunting tape, and go, and all you saw was good shots or whatever. But I was going back and thinking about that, oh, he made a great shot and it didn't look that good. And then they're showing the recovery. We found him. We made a great shot. You don't see the hole, but the deer's stiff as a board. How many
yeah,
hours did it take?
yeah,
There was a lot of editing, and I'm not faulting the guys for doing that. I think they did it because they didn't want to give hunting a bad name.
yeah. And or there's I will say this: the guidelines early on in Outdoor Channel television and TNT, they wouldn't allow us to show things like that.
Sure, but now you've got some platform. Although YouTube's getting kind of
Yeah,
bad as far as showing blood and stuff, but you've got other platforms to show things, and just being able, like I really like following the hunting public. I don't
yeah,
know
I
if
do
you
too.
and
I like those
they
guys.
show everything. They show the empty-handed hunts and the misses and the gut shots and it's just the reality of the sport. There's a good in everything, there's bad in everything, and being willing to do that, like I said, you guys showing that video with Waddell, and it happens to everybody. What I was saying, where I was getting with the other videos, it made people think, hey, these guys never miss. These guys never make a bad shot, when it wasn't the reality. It just wasn't shown.
Yeah,
Um, and unfortunately, I hope I never make another bad shot. And everybody should have that attitude. But unfortunately, it happens. I made a bad shot with a rifle this year, and that irks me to the core.
it happens.
I shot low on a deer and broke its leg below its chest, and I've never done that.
It happens.
30 years of deer hunting, I've never done that. But I mean, yeah, it just, it's one of those things. And I made I mean, it's reality. And when you post something like that on a forum or you post a video on YouTube, everybody climbs out of their mom's basement and starts, well, you should have done this and you should have done this and you should have done it. Everybody's an expert, but in I'm a I'm an Army veteran. I did a tour in Iraq,
Thank you for
and
your
what I always say, thank you for that. What I always say when you're talking about people with PTSD and stuff like that is unless you've been there, you don't know what happened.
Yeah.
It's not as an extreme case, but it's the same thing with hunting. Unless you were there, you don't know what happened. I can think in my mind that, yeah, I should have done this different, or I may be sitting there and I know that everything I did was right, but that deer jumped and changed the game, or the wind picked up as I was releasing the trigger, or whatever the case may be. But I know it because I was there. You know it because you were there. The guys watching the video don't know what actually happened. I shot at a deer one time. This has been 20 years ago with my bow, and it was about 30 yards. And when I shot, that deer came unglued, and my arrow passed. I remember thinking, if I shoot this deer, I'm gonna pin it to the tree, because it was right. So I'm lined up with this tree, and I shoot, and that deer moved so fast that my arrow hit that tree, but it brushed its tail.
Yeah. Yeah.
She spun around going the other direction, and I brushed her tail. And not that that was a slower bow, it was 30 yards. The deer gets a vote. That's one thing the ranch fairy says all the time. The animal gets a vote, and they don't want to die.
Yeah.
Well, I've really enjoyed this. I've really enjoyed your time.
Yeah.
While you're here, go ahead and let people know about any of your social media, your other channels and stuff. And then we'll close it out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. Appreciate your service, like I'd said earlier. And
Thank you.
yeah, and it never gets old. I mean, I've spent 40 years of my life just talking about archery and like Ted says, the magical, mystical flight of the arrow, and it never gets old. I mean, when we
You're
built
right.
our house here, I sold my store in 2006. We built our house in 2008. I made sure that we had 20 yards in the clear so I could have an indoor range in my basement as well as a shop. My wife said, "You sold your business. Why are you putting a shop?" I said, "Honey," I said, if I dipped septic tanks out for a living, I'd always be doing something with these bows and arrows, and I just can't get enough of it." So I appreciate the great conversation, the fireside type conversation that we had. I could talk about this, have these roundtable discussions and such every day, all day. So I'm blessed to get to do that. So I appreciate everybody, listening and following along. But you can follow us at Bone Collector, Realtree, and then all my personal stuff is T-Bone Outdoors on Instagram, Twitter, as well as Facebook. So yeah, we're always posting something, what we're doing, whether it's a funny comment about something, or archery, or hunting. We got a mixed bag of everything on there. So I
Oh
appreciate
yeah,
everybody
and
following.
Waddell will be posting his garden videos before too long.
Oh yeah, him and his wife are doing chickens now. So
Oh, and that's what it's all about. Just get outside.
yep,
Quit playing video games. Get outside and enjoy it. Whether
exactly.
it's hunting, fishing, growing tomatoes, whatever it is. Well, I thank you so much. I hope everybody enjoyed this, and we'll see y'all next time.
Thank
Have
you.
a good one, T-Bone.
Thank you, buddy.
Yep, thank you.